This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. This is a show talking about topics of the day from a secular and humanist value perspective. Here is your host, Douglas Berger.
In this episode, we talk about consequences for speaking out, including being disowned by family. Point out how protecting the culture of life doesn't help everyone, that 96 churches in our area firmly hate the LGBTQ community, and then we have a deeply moving conversation with Dawn Noak Anthony, a courageous survivor of domestic abuse and religious trauma. She openly shares her experiences from her conservative religious upbringing to her transformation into an author and advocate.
Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the secular humanists of Western Lake Erie, building community with reason and compassion for a better tomorrow. Views expressed on the Glass City Humanist are not necessarily those of Sholey or WAKT Radio.
Welcome to another episode of the Glass City Humanist on WAKT. My name is Doug. I am the host. And I kind of wanted to go back to, if you listened to a previous episode that was on WAKT, and I had talked about families. I had seen a performance by Henry Rollins, the punk legend, and he was talking about his family. And so I used that as an opportunity to talk about how many families are different. You know, there's not one particular way of having a family, you know, and I brought up the Brady Bunch. Well, when I was talking about that story, when I was using that story, I used a couple of personal anecdotes. And I talked about a particular family member who had had issues with her biological mother and had claimed in a newspaper article that her mother had died from cancer and it was her stepmom. Well, needless to say, I had used that clip of me talking about that to promote the podcast episode that information applied to. And the family member that I was talking about happened to hear that blurb. So I have been disowned by that family member, even though I didn't mention who it was. I didn't name them or anything. They unfriended me from Facebook and they have cut me out of their life simply because I was talking about them, even though I wasn't specifically talking about them. And that's the danger. I mean, that's the danger you take when you speak out for anything, really, not just family members, but if you speak out about government or the majority Christian, the sectarian views in this country. You speak out and you're going to get there's going to be consequences for speaking out. Some kind of consequences. Either you lose friends or family, or at the worst, you get arrested and put in jail for speaking out. That's what they do to a lot of the protesters, or have done to a lot of the protesters, is the police will arrest you, throw you in jail. And then, of course, you are exercising your First Amendment rights. So then they make the arrest go away and they release you. But the fact that they arrested you and put you in jail overnight or for a weekend or whatever, you know, that's the point. They're trying to intimidate you. And so that's the thing, that when you don't conform to the majority view or opinion of anything in this country, there's going to be consequences. Some of them are just going to be annoyances, like people calling you names. And then there's other times that people are going to threaten your life. And I think I was talking about that in the podcast episode about the release time, public school release time education classes, that if you complain about it, these good Christians are going to possibly threaten your life or say, hey, we know where you live. And that's how that group mob ethic works, is you try to intimidate people that don't conform. And so this family member that disowned me after I spoke about their dismissal of their biological mother doesn't concern me, because this particular family member, we haven't had a strong relationship. And so how was it different from before till now? Not very different. So I'm not like crying, I'm not, drinking alcohol and crying myself to sleep at night or anything like that. So that's all good. The other thing that I wanted to talk about too today is while this episode is being broadcast on WAKT, it is going to be Election Day, November the 7th, hopefully. So it's going to be Election Day, and one of the items that's on the ballot is State Issue 1, which is the Reproductive Freedom Amendment, which would enshrine in the Ohio Constitution a woman's ability to get an abortion if she needs to get one, if she desires to get one, and she consults with a doctor, and the doctor says she needs to get one. And it will eliminate the intervention of the state pretty much completely. They are still going to be allowed to regulate abortions post viability, which at this point is like 22 or 23 weeks into the pregnancy. But anytime before that, it'll be totally up to the woman and her family and her doctor, as it should be. But anyway, so I bring that up because I like to read the letters to the editor in the Toledo Blade. And they've had some they've had a lot of good letters in support of State Issue 1 from people that say, we should pass it. But then, of course, they get the people that just rehash the talking points that they've heard either at their church or from conservative Republicans or people that are opposed to the amendment. And one of the things that these people like to talk about is they talk about a culture of life. Whenever they're opposed to abortion, they talk about we need to maintain the culture of life. And what that means is that they think that the unborn fetus is far more important than the actual person carrying that fetus. And that the person carrying that fetus doesn't exist or matter. That the ultimate thing is to have that fetus become a child and be born. And that is just so arrogant. It's not even funny. It just and they talk about, well, we got to consider, all lives, they say that all lives matter. I'm pro-life, but they totally ignore the person who is carrying the fetus. And it bothers me, that type of argument about culture of life. It's hypocritical. To me, it sounds hypocritical. It doesn't sound sincere. I'm sure they are sincere when they say it, but if you're going to talk about the culture of life and protecting all lives, then you also need to consider the person carrying the fetus and their needs and their health, and it shouldn't outweigh the fetus. It just shouldn't, because the person that's carrying the fetus is actually living. They are breathing. They have a life. They have family. They maybe have a job. They're a productive member of society. An unborn fetus has a potential to be a person, but they have not contributed anything to society at that point. So I don't see why their rights should trump the rights of the person carrying the fetus. But that's one of the debates about abortion overall that a lot of people get into. But anyway, so I was reading those letters, and it was just gave me a chuckle when people talk about protecting the culture of life. The other thing too was there's a recent letter responding to my nemesis, Professor Lee Strang, had wrote an op-ed in opposition to State Issue 1, of course, because that's what he does. And and in his op-ed, he was talking about a poll that about a poll that the Script News agency made that said 42% of Ohioans say they would like to see more restrictions added to the current state law that bans abortion after 22 weeks of pregnancy. That same number say they disagree with restrictions. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So what I did was, and this guy did this in an op-ed, and somebody had responded that he did not provide a source in his op-ed. He didn't say where it was from. He didn't provide a link. And so in the letter, the Toledo Blade put in the link, and I looked it up. There's some problems with this poll. Well, there's a problem with the polls in general, because polls are, I don't want to say are totally useless, because they're not totally useless, but you really have to be careful. One, how you ask the questions, and also things like sample size. How many people are you asking? Do they skew conservative, or do they skew liberal? A lot of these polling organizations, they are professionals, and they try to balance the responses that they get. They try to ask the people correctly, and get the information, but sometimes they don't. So you have to look at, when somebody says, well, this poll says this. Well, what you have to do is you have to look at the whole poll, their methodology, how they got the responses. Did they actually talk to people, or was it automated? Was it via social media? And also the size. How many people did they talk to? And the demographic makeup. And so I looked at all of this, and one of the couple of things that stood out to me was that the poll was from June of this year, before the previous state issue one about changing the threshold for passing constitutional amendments in Ohio, with the attempt to raise it. So the poll was from June, which, this is being October, November. That's a little bit dicey if it's that far, because when you're doing it that much distance, people tend to get better informed as we get closer to an election. So it's better to do the polling closer to the actual election. Anyway, so he pointed out that 42% said we need more restrictions, and for other 40% said no more restrictions. So if you look at the actual poll, it said almost 60% agreed with this phrasing: every individual has a right to make and carry out one's own reproductive decisions. And that is the text from State Issue 1. So roughly 20% of the people who responded that they want more abortion restrictions don't believe the government should make those decisions. It's just, it's not good. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that 42% want more restrictions, but 60% don't want the state involved at all. So you kind of have to, the polling is a little bit suspect. You'd have to get more detail. So that's the thing I kind of wanted to point out is, because we're going to be seeing a lot more of this polling and people talking about the elections and issues in the election. Well, next year we have the presidential election coming up, so you're going to see a lot of polls being done, a lot of gauging the electorate, as it were. And so you just have to be careful, and you have to check. And the other thing to check with polls too is there's a margin of error. So if you have if they're polling for two issues, like yes or no, and the number of yeses and the number of no's are within 1 or 2 percentage points, and the margin of error for the poll is listed as 1 to 2 percentage points, essentially then the question is tied. Statistically, the question is tied. But you'll have people that will cherry pick, and they'll say, well, look, like Professor Strang did, 42% of people want more restrictions, but they'll ignore the 60% that don't want the state involved. And so you have to be very cognizant. You have to be very aware of who's doing the poll, who benefits from that poll, And again, the mechanics of it, like how many people were questioned, what kind of questions were asked. Those are very important things. So I polling isn't, some people will say, well, polls don't matter. But in some cases, polls do matter.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio.
Another interesting bit that I discovered while reading the Toledo Blade this past weekend, was that in their religion page, a religion offering, they had an article about all of the churches that had left the United Methodist. They became disaffiliated with the West Ohio Conference of the United Methodist Church. And this is this is a humanist not podcast, but a humanist show. So we really shouldn't be concerned about churches disaffiliating from their organizations. But this one is of interest to me because of the reasons that many of these churches disaffiliated. There was a special session in Dayton, near Dayton, on October the 28th, in which conference members approved requests from 96 churches to disaffiliate from the denomination effective October the 31st. And it says in the article, 22 of those churches are in the Maumee River District, which is Toledo area. And then get this, the disaffiliations join 80 in West Ohio that left in November of 2022, and 172 that left in June. About 600 United Methodist churches remain in the conference. And it says among the regional churches are Wilkins UMC in Swanton, Beulah UMC in Delta, St. Paul Trinity UMC in Elmore, and churches in the villages in Defiance, Hancock County, Sandusky, Ottawa, Paulding, Putnam, Seneca, Wood, and Wyandotte counties. And then they even had a link to the list, and I'll share this list. I'll share it somewhere because I don't know how long this list is going to be available through the Blade. And it says in the article, it says some churches that choose to leave the United Methodist Church have joined the newly formed conservative Global Methodist Church, while other congregations have voted to become independent. And so a lot of times what happens is when churches split, if they're all together and then they split off on their own, it's because of most likely theology. Like there'll be disputes about whose interpretation of the Bible is more correct, or whose religion is more answering to God, or however they do that. I don't know how that works. But anyway, and so that's what they'll do is they'll say, well, you're not Christian enough, so I'm going to go and be Christian over here. And so that's how a lot of churches split off. Or usually you'll see it in individual churches where a section of people will go off and form their own church. They had that happen here in the Unitarian circles, where some people that were going to the Unitarian church in Toledo decided that they wanted their own church, and so then they set up a church, the Maumee Valley Unitarian Church near Bowling Green. That's an offshoot of the Toledo Unitarians. They're all the same. They didn't leave the denomination, but these are the Methodist churches that have left the denominations. So the congregations that separated under this special rule that they had instituted, it's rooted in issues related to sexuality, such as ordaining LGBTQ clergy and officiating same-sex marriages, which has caused tensions within the denomination worldwide. You have like in most mainline religious churches, you have an element, a conservative element that hates gay people. Well, they're going to say they don't hate gay people, but they don't think that gay people, LGBTQ people, are worthy of their religion. that they've sinned and they're going to be damned to hell by God, whatever, how that works. And so a majority of these churches have left because of that. And so I think it's great that they have this printed list of the recently approved disaffiliations, because now I have a list of churches that I will no longer support in any way. I won't partner with them. I won't support people who attend these churches. And I want to see them taxed. If you discriminate against people, then you should be taxed. And so they give me this good list of churches to avoid, and I think that for people that want to be part of the Methodist Church or want to attend church services, this would be a good list of churches to avoid. Of course, you don't have to do that with like Toledo Unitarian, because they're a welcoming, inclusive group. My group, the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie, also are inclusive. We don't care if you're LGBTQ. We don't care if you're conservative Christian. As long as you support our mission and our values, you're free to join. And I think a lot of these churches, and this is a mainline. United Methodist Church is a mainline Protestant denomination. They're dying, just like many of these mainline Protestant and Catholic churches are dying, because the old geezers that won't change are driving out the young people. They go to like Cedar Creek and some of these other mega churches with the rock and roll music. And I know, gosh, I'm so old. And so they're driving out the young people, the people that are more likely to support LGBTQ. So you're going to have these festering wounds of conservatism, and they're going to try to be supporting a church where their members are dying off, and so they're just going to go away. But hey, at least they're doing it for the principle of it, right? Anyway, so I'll make that list available. If you have a subscription to the Blade, it's in the religious offerings, dated November the 5th. Sarah Reading is the reporter, the religious reporter. They have a link to that list. And so, check it out.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show.
Our guest today is Dawn Noak Anthony. She's a former Christian and homeschooler of 9 children. She was the victim of domestic abuse and religious trauma, and since getting out of her bad marriage and religion, she's led a life of healing, rebuilding, and growth. She has adult children as well as 6 children that attend public schools, and she is a vocalist living in the Columbus, Ohio area, and she not only sings with the symphony and the opera choruses and special events, but she gives recitals to raise money for domestic violence shelters in the area. Thank you for joining us today, Dawn.
Thank you.
So, I've given a brief biography of you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself that maybe I missed?
Yeah, I'm just a woman that's trying to have my own identity. I think I had told you before that as long as I can remember, my identity was either I was a daughter, a sister, a friend, then a wife and a mother. And, I'm more than that. Those are great things, but just learning to have my own voice and know that I have worth just because I'm here. So, yeah.
Now, did you grow up in a religious household or did you marry into it?
Yes, it was a religious household. My parents, my mom had been brought up very religious. My father not so much, but he had a grandma that took him to church, that whole kind of thing. And then when they met, they got very involved in the Jesus movement, if you remember what that was all about. Kind of an answer to the hippie movement. They thought that that was so wild and rebellious, and so they latched on to what was going on in the 70s. And so yeah, we listened to a lot of classical music because both of my parents were musicians, not professional, but they sang on the side, and my dad was super talented and just about, I mean, anything he put his hand to. He was a drummer, a dancer. But so we listened to all kinds of music, but boy, Christian music was a big deal. So, and in the 70s, that was Keith Green, Second Chapter of Acts, those kind of groups. Yeah. So, but yeah, we were religious, and yet I would say not quite as fundamental as what I ended up in, although they were, but it just, what I found myself in later was so much stricter than what I had ever had before. So, yes, they were strict with my choice of music. I mean, I loved rock music in the 70s and 80s, but I couldn't really listen to that in their presence. So I'd have to hear it when they were gone, or I went to a friend's house or something like that. So, but yeah, so they were strict with music and things like that. And yet I went to public school, and, there, it was fine for me to have all kinds of different friends and that. So went to a lot of churches, a lot of different churches. I wouldn't say church hoppers. My dad usually had a very good reason for leaving different churches. Either there was something theological that he had a problem with, or if he just felt like we needed a change that would help the family. So I look back and I think, well, that was good. And I did get quite an education with different churches, because we were the gamut. I mean, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, charismatic, which was crazy. Which I don't think my dad was completely on board with it, but he had friends that were in those churches, so he was there to support them. And then the last church that we went to before I left for college was a Christian Missionary Alliance church. And in fact, that's kind of why I chose the Christian college that I went to. So I had been public schooled, and I thought, well, I would really like to go to a Christian college. And the CMA, that's their abbreviation, they're really missions oriented. And so the missions conferences, the church camp, everything was about, oh, you should be a missionary. And so I started thinking that, even though I was a musician from the time I was very little, but I thought, oh, I should be a missionary. So I went to a Christian college, which was CMA down in Georgia, and I got an eyeful of what Christian colleges really are about. So good people there. Most of my professors I loved, but the administration and those that made the rules, it was very, very hypocritical. So that was hard. I would like to say that was the beginning of the end for me in Christianity, because I think that laid the groundwork. But then I stayed in religion a lot longer. And so, unfortunately, but and I did change my major while I was there. I went back to music. So
when you met your husband at the time, was that through school or
I was on a break from college, and I went to go see my old pastor from Ohio and his family for a break. They had moved to Orlando, Florida, and so I was there. And then the man that I met was in the Navy in Orlando, and he was friends with the family, unfortunately. So, but it seemed like, I mean, I really liked him. He was very charming and all of that. And I was in a relationship back in school where my boyfriend had not returned to college, but I was having a lot of doubts and thinking maybe this isn't the right thing for me. So I meet this young man in the Navy, and I thought, well, this is not going to go anywhere, but he's just really nice to have as a friend. And I had broken up after that with my other boyfriend, and then the letters started and the phone calls, and then it developed into something more. And yeah, I wish it hadn't. But, hey, when you're young and want to be taken care of, I had in my background the whole my mom and dad really didn't want me to date a whole lot when I was in high school, because they were all, think about the future, keep your eye on school and all that. But also in the back of my mind was, you only date to get married, and that's it. And so there wasn't any let's go out on a date for fun. It was always there's an end game to this. And so I heard that from my mom, but I heard it from church and youth groups. And then I get to college, and I swear everybody was preparing for marriage. So yeah, it was Tacoma Falls College, and there was a motto that said, where character is developed with intellect, which that sounds great, but not really. But a friend of mine had worded it differently, where character is developed with wedding bells. And she was right. So a lot of people just went there to get their MRS degree, and not everyone, but it just kind of seemed to go that way. So yeah.
Now, when you did finally, meet your husband and start a relationship, was he religiously conservative back then? Like, was he religiously strict?
He was raised in a Christian family, and he was actually going to the church of my former pastor. So it was a Christian Missionary Alliance church. Yeah, he wasn't what he ended up turning into. He was a Christian, yet not so fundamentalist. So I didn't see that till much later. So.
And then
Yeah.
You homeschooled your children.
Yeah.
Was that put it entirely on you, or did you have teaching experience before doing it, or that was just something that was expected for you to do?
It was something that I was interested in doing because I had met a family back in Ohio that they homeschooled their girls. And I thought, well, that would be interesting. And so I wanted to do it, but then it became more of with every child that was added, it was getting to be too much. And yeah, I was the sole teacher. I did all of that. And the only support that he ever was when there was a yearly convention, a homeschool convention, and then he could parade his little darlings around the convention and see, look what I did, which he didn't teach. And I would be in the middle of a lesson, and he would, unfortunately, was working from home the last several years that we were still married and working from home, but he'd always come through the room and interrupt or tell one of my kids, hey, you want to go to the tool store with me or whatever. I'm like, I'm trying to teach a lesson here. So it was very difficult. And you had asked something else about the homeschooling. Oh, teaching.
Yeah. Did you have any previous teaching experience, or?
The only experience was I had private music students. I used to teach flute and voice. And so that was it. And then, I had my degree from college, but I didn't have a teacher's certificate. No. So, and of course I was always feeling like, I was inadequate. So I would go to the homeschool conventions, or I would go to support groups sometimes and, tell the other ladies, hey, is this something you feel like? And they're like, oh, you're fine. You have everything you need because of God. And
all right. And then, of course, in your biography, you stated that you had 9 children.
yes.
Was that part of the religion to have that many kids, or did that just kind of naturally happen?
It kind of happened that, in the homeschool movement, that's kind of pushed. Not all homeschoolers. I know that there are atheist homeschoolers and all of that, but the homeschool movement that we found ourselves in, or I found myself in, was super, super conservative, and as many children as possible, no birth control. And it didn't start like that. It didn't, but once we had lived in Delaware, Ohio, And that was where my support group was. Once we left there and we moved into the country, then I really didn't have the support anymore. And he just started talking like, nope, we just got to trust God for these children. We're not going to stop his blessings. All the while I was drowning and very, very tired. So, yeah.
So
But
it wasn't something that you enjoyed, was having so many kids. It actually caused bad
yeah,
feelings
I
for
mean,
you. And
I love the children, obviously, and I still do. And, I couldn't imagine life without them. But yeah, while I was in it, the more that came, the worse I felt. And so I would say by the time the seventh child was on the way, I had fallen into a very deep depression. But that was the other thing. Even if I said something, it was either ignored or, you just trust God. It was always trust God. You must not have enough faith. And going to a therapist, the talk of postpartum depression or regular depression, it just wasn't encouraged at all. Oh, I was just going to say too, what I didn't tell you in the biography was that I had 3 miscarriages as well. And uh, one of those, I nearly died. In fact, it was so close that I had a midwife for the last few children. And it took me to say, we got to talk to her now. And she luckily lived about a block away from me. And she came and she said, you got to call the squad now or she's not going to make it. So, and his answer to that was more kids. So yeah, it didn't stop. And the midwife was very upset too. And I love her. We still talk. She's a Christian lady. But even her beliefs and how much she loves children, she knew I shouldn't have any more kids. But yeah, but the
and
husband did not support that.
and when those miscarriages occurred, did you get blamed for them, or did they just say, well, that was just God's will? Or
It was more of a, yeah, it's God's will. He knows best. So,
okay.
and of course, what I didn't say was my ex was a huge narcissist. And so I didn't even know what narcissist was for a while until I started looking it up and thinking, oh my goodness, his face could be in the dictionary next to that word. But yeah, he just got worse and worse. And, I would be going through a miscarriage or something, but he had it much worse, or if I was sick, oh, he had it much worse. If he had allergies, he was dying. There was one time, I think I only had 3 kids, but I had strep throat and we had no insurance, which is a whole nother subject. There's so many times we had no health insurance. So that was scary. But this time we didn't have insurance. And I luckily knew a doctor that had been in a choir I was directing. He made a house call. He said, you've got strep. And I was really, really sick. He leaves. The husband comes home and says, why aren't you doing the dishes? Why aren't you getting up? And I mean, I literally could not move. But that's what I dealt with. It was just his problems were worse. He knew everything. He was a genius. And so, yeah. And he was an amazing follower of Jesus, which when I look back, I was the one that was more devoted than he ever was. But now he uses that as a, I'm the godly person here. And look, she left.
So,
So,
so basically, he was just a mean asshole that used
yeah,
religion to justify his actions.
exactly. And he still does it to this day. So, yeah. But at least I don't have to live with him. So,
Well,
yeah.
you left that bad marriage and religion. Was there a specific event or incident, or was it just the culmination of everything that you had gone through up to that point that you
I
decided?
think it was I think it was the culmination. I really do. And like I said, when I was in college, I really felt like that was laying some groundwork for me to start questioning not just other Christians, because I have a lot of people that have said, well, the church, those people, they hurt you. That's not God. Well, I started to examine the whole thing and I realized the questions I had as a very little girl about how ridiculous the Adam and Eve story was and how insane it was that he caused genocide and flooded the entire world and the animals and the children that were slaughtered by the Hebrews and all that. I had those questions as a little girl, but I was scared to ask. And so I started asking those questions, I would say in college, but then I still was quiet because I was afraid of the alternative. I was afraid of losing that, I guess, my hope for afterlife, my community of Christian people I knew, that I was afraid of losing any of that. So I still stayed quiet. But then when I started to wake up to what was going on in the marriage, it just kind of went hand in hand. I not only was going to divorce a person, I had to divorce religion. And it was scary, but it also felt more free than I've ever felt. And ironically, the scripture says that we have freedom in Christ. And I'm like, no, it's actually opposite. I mean, you're, what does it say? Paul says, when you were slaves to sin, now you're slaves to Christ. Well, that's still slavery, isn't it? So I wasn't truly free. And so, yeah, it was a combination of things. And then right before the divorce was final, I remember I was at a friend staying with them for a little while I was trying to find a place to live. And I was outside at night and they were in the country, no lights on, gorgeous stars and expanse. And I remember looking up in the sky going, you're really not there. You're nothing. And from that time on, I had just given myself the green light to go, okay, we have a new life. So, yeah.
And how did you finally leave? Did you like escape, like run away, or did you get some
Yeah.
outside help to leave? Or
Yeah, I had my parents were very, very encouraging. They financially couldn't help us out and didn't have a house for all those kids. But I had a very good friend from church from years ago that we grew up together, and she's now an atheist. But she and her husband had a great big house and no kids, just dogs. And she knew what was happening. And she said, when you can get out, you have a place here until things simmer down. And I had gotten a lawyer by that time. And she said, you need to get you and the children out when he's on one of his business trips. And, I was scared to do it. You can imagine all the things that I thought of, how long is this going to take? Am I ever going to be able to come home? Am I going to be accused of kidnapping the children? All those things. And I didn't want to do any of that. And I wasn't setting out to hurt him. It was just all I could think of is I have to get out. And there was no way I could leave without the children because then I would have been abandoning them. And so my lawyer had said, hey, get the kids and go at least until the papers have been served and we figure out some kind of an arrangement so that you feel safe. So unfortunately, he kept avoiding being served. And so we were out of the house for a good 4 months. So me and 9 children, and I had, I didn't have a job or anything like that. So I was relying on friends. I didn't stay with my first friend too long, but I stay with a voice teacher and, my husband today, he's been my friend from high school. He actually got a cabin for us for a while, just different places so we wouldn't overstay our welcome with other friends. So, yeah, it was scary. And I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead, but it was a long divorce. And the ex was trying so desperately to take the children away from me. He wanted full custody. So, yeah.
yeah, a lot of situations like that. That's what they
Uh-huh.
use. They use the children to try to keep you in the marriage, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't, and
Well, and I
that's
think
what
he
they
figured
do.
out of money and places to go. And when I didn't, he couldn't believe it.
on to happier things.
Yes.
You are a vocalist,
Yes.
and you sing with the symphony and opera choruses.
Yes.
And you mentioned you'd always been interested in music. Were you always a vocalist, or?
Yes. Yeah. From the time I was about 4 years old, my dad had me on stage singing, and sometimes I sang with my parents, but a lot of times I was just doing the solo thing. So, and then of course I got into choirs and and then in college, and I majored in vocal performance, minored in flute, and then I got married, and unfortunately, he was in the Navy, so we were not in any one place too long. But wherever I was, I tried to sing with different situations and people. So yeah,
Yeah, and you do use your voice to give back, literally, to raise
yeah.
money for local domestic violence shelters. How has that worked out for you? Have you
Well,
raised a lot of
so
money?
far, well, I would say, first of all, so far I've only had one recital, and I'm currently working on another one, which is in a few months. Um, but yeah, I do believe that I don't have a final count what the last recital brought in, but it definitely helped them a lot. So, um, and I've been able to use some of my musician friends to help me out with that as well. So,
You also let us know that you're writing a couple books. Can you give us any information about them, or will they be out
yeah,
soon?
I should say in all my spare time, because you can imagine with a house full of kids. Um, First, I should say about my arrangement. I have 6 kids that still have to go back and forth between us and their biological father, which is sad, but it is what it is. So we're week on, week off. So on the weeks they're not here, I'm either desperately trying to clean up the mess they made from the week before or trying to just recover. So it's been hard to sit down and write, but I have taken it back up again over the last few months. And usually I have to leave the house to do it because sitting at home trying to write, I'll find something that I have to do. So the library, the coffee shop are great places. But yeah, one book that I'm really trying to get finished first is one I started when I was married to the ex. And that was a hard thing because he wanted to edit. He was always looking over my shoulder. And the book is about Beethoven, who is one of my favorite composers, but how would I say, it's a time travel type book, a little bit of historical fiction. So I am putting some accuracies in there. But anyway, when I was writing it before, I couldn't write it the way I wanted to write it because, it just wasn't up to his standards. And he honestly was jealous. He was jealous of my time, and he was jealous of Beethoven, who has been dead since 1827. So, yeah, there's a little bit of that narcissist coming in too. So,
Yeah, I was taking time away from him
oh
and
yeah,
focus on
exactly.
him. Yeah.
And every child that came, which you'd think he'd pick up on the fact the more kids she has, the less time she has for me. But I just kept having kids, and yeah, he would use that against me too. That, oh well, you're all for the kids. Well, so back to Beethoven. Yeah, I am writing that now. I would say I'm about halfway through, and not going to give any other spoilers, but it's been an enjoyable time of writing for me. So, and then the other book is what I told you earlier, and that is I do want to write some kind of memoir of my life and how things were when I was young, and I do want to talk about the old marriage, but my biggest thing is to talk about how I got out of religion and uh, my hopes for the future and helping other people. So because I know there's a lot of people out there that feel alone and are afraid to come out as atheist or agnostic. And but I would
And
say,
that's precisely why I'm interviewing you today,
yeah,
is to give people the hope that if they're in a situation similar to yours, that there's a
hmm,
way out, that they can
yeah,
get out if they work to do it.
right, right. And it's hard because when I was in the midst of everything, I didn't even know I could find help. I really didn't know that. And really, also, when you're in religion, you kind of go on autopilot, and that's one way to say it. Also, I felt like I had blinders on, and it was the only way that I could survive, was just to forget the idiocy of Christianity, and forget about the abuse that was happening, even though it was there. And I mean, also the religious trauma. I would not allow myself to believe that was happening. And so once you can get to a point of recognizing this is wrong, then you can start to reach out. Um, so, but yeah, there's a lot of people out there that may not have as much support as I did, and that's, I don't know. I hope that these interviews help. Uh, you know, when I was spending so much time without my kids on the weeks I didn't have them, first getting out, I was watching lectures and debates. I would say Christopher Hitchens was my absolute favorite. Um, but then I would link to other atheists and realize, wow, there's some people out there that have had quite a past and quite a story when they were in religion. They got out. So it's helped to just, YouTube's been wonderful. It helped me a lot to find different people. So, in fact, the group in Columbus, which I don't get to go to very often, um, I found them because Richard Carrier, do you know that name?
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, I'm
yeah.
familiar with them.
So I had been watching his lectures, and lo and behold, at the time he was in Columbus. And so I didn't get to meet him in person, but we connected on Facebook, and I said, "Hey, this is my story. How do I find a group of people that could be supportive?" And so he told me about the Omnipresent Atheist group. And so that's led to some great friendships.
Yeah, the Columbus area, yeah, they do have a number of free thought groups in the area.
Yeah.
The Humanist Community of Central Ohio,
Yeah.
Omnipresent Atheists, and yeah, so that's, I mean, like I said, I used to live in Columbus, and that's where I got started, and
Right.
so
Yeah.
you ended up in a good area. It's not
I do.
overly religious.
Right. Well, unfortunately, what I didn't tell you was we live an hour from there. So we're in Podunk, Fredericktown, which is very, very, very red, very, very pro-Trump, um, very religious. And so it has been hard for us because we can't get to Columbus as much as we'd like. And when I'm there, I'm singing. I don't usually have a whole lot of time to reach out, but that's why Facebook's so wonderful, because we can at least message each other and all that. But yeah, here in where we're at, it's very hard to find people that we feel comfortable with opening up. We have met a few, but we found a lot of people just kind of stay to themselves because it, it's a very hostile environment. So what did they say? There's no love like Christian hate, and that's what we feel like. So
Okay, Don, as we wrap this up for today, is there anything that we have or haven't touched on that you want our listeners to take away from your experiences?
oh, I I think mostly just keep going. If you're looking to get out of well, first of all, if you're in danger, if you're a woman that's in a situation, just know there are shelters. I mean, there's a shelter close by where we live, and the shelter in Columbus that I've been raising money for, they are amazing. So that's first and foremost, get out of the abusive situations. But as far as if you're trying to get out of the religious community, it can be done. And there's people out there that'll come by your side. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for your time today, and keep us in the loop when your books come out and when your next recital comes out, and we'll put the links up and send
Great.
it out and promote it for you, and hopefully get some more people interested in your story and use it for themselves to get out of religion.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And it's not just a matter of getting out. It's what can we do to make a difference in our world? because there's a lot of people say, well, what's your purpose if you're an atheist? Well, I'm making my purpose. I'm making meaning out of my life by helping those around me. So it's definitely not an empty existence at all. And I'm excited for the future. So.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show. Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie. Showley can be reached at humanistswle.org. Glass City Humanist is hosted, written, and produced by Douglas Berger, and he's solely responsible for the content. Our theme music is Glass City Jam, composed using the Amplify Studio. See you next time.